You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
Trump's real target isn't who you think it is, based on an article by John Sawyer. The Wedge was never sports. The point was power. The immediate story is simple. The Supreme Court has let states ban transgender athletes, and the number of people affected is tiny. But that is exactly why the ruling matters. This was never about athletic fairness. It was about teaching the public which lives can be carved up first, and which institutions will bless the carving. The real power in this story sits with Donald Trump's political project, the state officials carrying it forward, and the judges who convert hostility into law. The target is not a population with leverage. It is a minority with little institutional protection, chosen precisely because that makes the attack cheap. Sports was a clean entry point. Conservatives identify trans women in sports as a perfect wedge because the issue sounds low stakes to people who are not paying attention. That is the trick. If you can get the public to accept exclusion in a narrow, emotionally simple case, you can train them to accept a larger premise that trans people are not fully entitled to equal treatment. The story does not stop at sports. The same campaign has moved toward identity documents, restrooms, and even the erasure of trans women from rape protections in federal prisons. Sports is the polite face of the project. It is the accessible lie that makes the uglier aims feel incremental instead of explicit. The centrist retreat is not neutrality. The article is right to point out that many Democrats, allies, and even trans people have been encouraged to let this one go. That is not strategic restraint. It is surrender dressed up as realism. When the center treats a targeted minority as politically expendable, it does not diffuse the right. It clears the field for the next attack. This is where common sense becomes an instrument of discipline. The same political class that claims to be allergic to extremism keeps agreeing to right-wing framing at the margin, hoping the violence will stay contained there. It never does. Every concession teaches the public that the weaker party can be isolated without cost. The court is normalizing exclusion. The Supreme Court ruling does more than authorize a ban. It manufactures precedent. Once the court blesses the idea that equal protection can be narrowed away for a small and unpopular group, the logic can travel. That is the dangerous part the article is circling around. If a legislature can declare certain trans people outside the protection of ordinary equality, then the mechanism is not confined to athletics. It becomes easier to imagine bans, carve-outs, and exceptions spreading outward into other areas of life, especially where the targets are politically isolated and the harm can be sold as administrative housekeeping. Federalism is becoming a weapon. The piece notes that blue states are moving to protect trans communities while red states are escalating. That is not a civic compromise. It is a country splitting into legal regimes with different levels of personhood depending on geography. The far right understands this. Its broader aim is not just to win local fights, but to federalize its cruelty so red states do not have to bear the embarrassment of restraint. If that project succeeds, then state law becomes a machine for producing unequal citizenship at scale. A person's rights will depend less on the Constitution than on where reactionaries draw the line that year. The larger pattern, this is what authoritarian politics looks like. In practice, pick a vulnerable group, brand them as a problem, recruit respectable language to launder the attack, and wait for the institutions that should resist to decide the target is too small to matter. That is how rights shrink. Not in one dramatic collapse, but in a sequence of supposedly limited decisions that everyone is told not to overthink. The trans fight is not an isolated culture war skirmish. It is a test of how much inequality the system can normalize before people notice the shape of the cage. The answer so far is grimly clear. The right is willing to punch down, the courts are willing to ratify it, and the center is still trying to preserve the fantasy that this only concerns someone else. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to AlterNet for today's article. With the automated voice of Norman, thanks for listening.